here today. And the panel is called Being Queerly Caribbean, the Politics of Queer Authenticity and Coming Out, and it's really great to look at that, or to be sitting here after those wonderful vignettes that were just showed. And it also made me think about the recent cross-dressing case in Guyana, which the appeal has just been heard, I think, on June 18th at the Caribbean Court of Justice in Trinidad and Tobago. The decision is being rendered in December. But in June, the project, University of the West Indies Rights Action Project, decided to go public with a lot of media attention, which they were being very sort of close-fisted about before. But by the time it got to the final Court of Appeal, they decided to do quite a lot of publicity in the region. And one of the things that they did was to get the litigants, who, and maybe we'll talk a bit about this, because at the time when the cross-dressing case happened with these working class trans folks, there was SASOD, but there wasn't really space for trans discussions. And so they formed a group called Guyana Trans United. And in June, they ran a series of newspaper columns where Angel Clark and Alessandra Harriman, three of the litigants, actually told their stories. And there's one or two of them that produced videos as well that are also on YouTube. It would be really great to have these things linked, which is perhaps something we'll come back to talk about during the panel, about making those connections between home and away, between here and there. So I wanted to start by, Detoxx Busti-ae is not here as yet, but we hope that she'll join us, so we have a seat there for her. But my name is Alissa Trotz, I teach, and that's all you need to know. And we're joined here by Wesley Crichlow, Mark-Ché Devonish, Lauren Pragg, and Jordyn Samuels. It's wonderful to meet you for the first time. Three other people I know, and it's such an honor to be on the panel with you. Their bios are all here, so I don't want to waste time by reading them. And I'm just going to throw the floor open to perhaps ask them to say something about themselves before we sort of get into some of the questions that have been raised for us here in the description of the panel about what it means to be queerly Caribbean. What does that look like? How do we think of that across questions of race, across questions of religion, faith, class, geography? So we're going to get a bit deeper into that depending on what you guys say to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Mark-Ché Devonish. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago.
Some real nationalism going on. Let's have these Trinidadies. The design look like a queer Caribbean Airlines. All right, I'm started a queer arts collective in the city called the Rude Collective, and our main goal is to basically reclaim and create spaces for queer people of color. What we've become known for basically is creating a hybrid art showcase and dance party. So we've kind of taken the dance floor space as an underground. The underground dance floor spaces have always been like a safe haven for people of color, trans people, and basically took that space and turned it into an art show as well, to curating work that exists and can exist in those spaces. I do other things, but we'll talk about that later. That's me. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren. I'm here, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, I am a queer person. My parents are from Trinidad. I was born and raised here. But I'm a queer, non-binary person, and I have also spent a lot of time in academia thinking about, talking about, studying these ideas of sexuality, gender, and the Caribbean. So that's why I'm here.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Jordyn. I was born in Canada, but I don't claim that. I do claim to be Antiguan. Small island pride, yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. So my work focuses around education. So I have a company that I started, a consultation company that's called Journeys in Equity. So I go into different schools, community centers, just like everywhere to do like professional development and trainings and workshops around equity, anti-oppression, anti-racism, and LGBTQ education mostly, like especially LGBTQ education, and also focusing on like equitable practices to make like workplaces and schools safer spaces. Developing policies, training people around language and identities, and also just trying to train people about the colonial histories that bring these identities and also bring the same kind of oppression. So that's who I am.
My name is Wesley Crichlow, and my name is Wesley Crichlow, and I'm a professor of criminology, and I teach queer criminology. I also teach Black Lives Matter at my university and race, crime, masculinity. I published Women and Bad Boys in 2003, which was my PhD thesis, and that book since then has been, I guess, used quite a bit in some classes in the curriculum. I go back to UE every year, or as much as I can, to do work and keep myself grounded in the Caribbean world as much as I can. And I'm also from Trinidad. And I want to thank Ryan for inviting me. Ryan and I never met, it's the first time. Yeah. And, so thank you very much for inviting me.
So I guess perhaps the first place I'll start, but we're not going to stay there because I want to move on to something else, and I'll explain why. But I have to begin with this first question, which is I wondered if each of you could identify something either from your own personal journeys or itineraries or the work you do in various spaces. Identify like something that you have seen or experienced as a major sort of challenge or stumbling block that you had to confront. And I'm going to ask you to think about this not necessarily in relation to navigating whiteness, but in relation to, given the panel, in relation to thinking about these questions and the silences within the Caribbean community. Again, going from the films that were shown there, thinking about this within the context of the Caribbean spaces you move in and the Caribbean communities you move in, whether from your own personal journeys, which Wesley has written so movingly about. Welcome, Detoxx, Busti-ae. No, that's fine. As soon as I finish this question, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and then we're going to have folks answer what I asked so you get a sense. So it was really to ask folks to talk, whether based on your own personal experience, if you're comfortable with that, or sharing some work you do. One challenge that you've had to struggle with in addressing some of these questions within Caribbean communities, whether back in the Caribbean or up here, and how you've attempted to deal with it. So why don't you introduce yourself, and then if you find that going with that question first, that's fine, or others can answer now.
As you guys heard, my name is Detoxx Busti-ae. I'm from New York City. I was originally born in the beautiful island of Jamaica. I'm a little scared now. I've been doing drag for about 10 years, and it's been amazing. Drag has opened up the door for me in so many different ways. If it was not for drag, I would not have been able to meet Muhammad, to meet Marcus, to meet Ryan, Tifa Wine. I would have never been able to meet these people, and I probably wouldn't have been here today. And it's just been so amazing. Like, I could go on and on and on about how much drag has made me more open to the world. And then the question, can you rephrase the question again? Because I wasn't paying attention to that part.
Well, the question was to think about a challenge, either personally that you've experienced or in the work that you do, addressing questions of homophobia or transphobia within the Caribbean community. You know, what is the challenge and how have you attempted to sort of open up space for it or deal with it, whether it was active homophobia, whether it was a violence, whether it was something in your church or faith, but just one instance, either from your own life, but I don't want people on the spot talk for themselves, it could be from you.
So something that I often do in my workplace, so when I'm not in drag, I work at Dylan's Candy Bar, and I've had to address it a lot because there's one particular person who I work with who she doesn't claim that she's trans, or she doesn't say publicly to the workplace, because when she started at Dylan's Candy Bar, she was more so a guy and androgynous. And over the years of her development at Dylan's Candy Bar, she became more, I would say, gender fluid, but she's very much a woman now. And often I hear people still calling her him, and to me it sometimes bothers me. I know she does not say anything because I guess she does just not want that drama, but I've had to correct people several times. I'm like, hey, you know, she may not be correcting you at this moment, but these are ways she's presenting her gender as a she. She has hair, she has dresses, she has all the parts, and you guys are still calling her and ignoring that. And a lot of these people I work with, they are homophobic, but it's on the inside, they don't often show it. And I find myself a lot at work sometimes addressing particular issues around that. I don't want to get more details about that, but it's something that I see a lot. And by the way, Dylan's Candy Bar is not homophobic at all, because there's so many gay people who work within the community. It's just, when it comes to trans, they don't often see that light of the LGBTQ community. And I find myself like addressing that a lot, and it's sometimes very challenging.
I think for myself, it's pretty much the point of the conference. It's about the invisibility that we experience as Afro-Caribbean people. I know that for myself personally, and for pretty much all the friends that I have, if people are still living at home, then, or even when they were living at home, everything was just about like, don't ask, don't tell. Like, there might not have been a point to actually come out because it might have been an unsafe environment. Even if the parents might have had, you know, suspicions or might have known that the child, you know, was on the LGBTQ spectrum, like, the violence came after like after you named it, so it was pretty much like don't ask, don't tell. And so that invisibility just leads to a lot of you know, self-hatred, a lot of stigma. And personally, like even when I was in high school, I was pulled out of the closet in like my first few months of grade 9, so I had to like deal with it all of my high school years. But I remember that from the Caribbean, I went to a Catholic all-girls school, so it was like hell. It was hell. So I remember with the Caribbean girls that I was trying to be friends with, you know, after they found out about me, they're just like, oh, black people shouldn't be gay. What? So yeah, exactly. So even when I was 14 and trying to figure out my identity, I was conflicted about, well, I was reflecting on how LGBTQ spectrum was so invisibilized in my own childhood. Like, I only really knew about Rosie O'Donnell growing up. I didn't really know about any like black people. So then when I heard that you can't be black people, you can't be black and gay in high school, I'm just like, okay, so, you know, what am I supposed to be, like non-black now, or, you know, just invisible? Like, I just didn't know what to do. And I think also, just to speak to a little bit of the hypocrisy when it comes to laws and culture, because the buggery and the sodomy laws that have been pervasive against most, like all Caribbean islands and all African countries, except for the ones that have been decriminalized now, you know, it's usually people not wanting to repeal those laws because they're just like, oh, international pressure. It's the Western people who are trying to change our culture, even though it was the Western culture that put those laws in there in the first place. So it's just dealing with that kind of hypocrisy and dealing with trying to be visible when people are just actively trying to erase you.
I think for me, I think that as Caribbean people, it can be really hard to know our histories, like our familial histories, and that's something that's always been a challenge and an interest of mine. So I've been really interested in talking to elders in my family, but you know, as a queer person, I've also, when I entered my 30s and everything, I started to think more and more about intergenerational connections among queer Caribbean people, and I definitely want to thank Leslie Lee Camp for always raising the issue of queer seniors and aging. That's been really important for me, knowing Leslie, and I did some field work back when I was still in academia I did some field work with queer Trinidadian women, and one of my goals was really to get as many people to talk to me who were 50 and over, and I came close, but it was definitely a really big challenge because, you know, of my entry points into community, because of trust, you know, building trust with different communities can take longer and things like that. But for me, I think a challenge has been knowing that history, having those relationships, like having those relationships be a consistent part of my life versus seeing people every so often and, you know, sort of longing for that connection, and being able to help tell people's stories, right, and understand how things have changed and how things have stayed the same, how things have been different for people in the diaspora and people living in the region. So that's it.
Yeah, so I can think of two things that come to mind when you brought the question up. My first experience, I say that was the most challenging, was I think growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, I find, from my experience at least with homophobia, was definitely very class-based. I find that growing up in a middle class family and having the opportunity to go to a really good school in Trinidad and getting that experience, it was I find it was like a double-edged sword, because sometimes I found myself existing in this bubble where there was homophobia, but it wasn't as violent as it could have been. And also I feel like the access to education made it, I was able to put into words a lot of the things that I was feeling, and being able to label homophobia and to label discrimination made it much easier to speak about it with my friends and with teachers. Also, going to a school that had a lot of gay teachers was also a big deal. Like openly gay teachers, at least. I think I went to an all-boys Catholic school in Trinidad and Tobago. CIC, if anybody knows. Okay. Of course. And yeah, I think for me, I can think of one moment that was really life-changing. I remember I was on the rugby team, and one of my friends, I found out that summer that he was gay. It's a guy who asked me, he was the guy who pushed me to join rugby, basically. And I found out he was gay that summer, and I was like so excited. I was like, oh my god, like I was starting Form 6, so I feel like a lot of the homophobia in like Form 1 to 5 was like, it was just so many people, everybody was kind of going through puberty. It was just like a really rough time for everybody. So even for the homophobia mixed with puberty, mixed with trying to figure out yourself, while also being in an all-boys school, was just like a lot happening at the same time, whereas I feel like Form 6, I felt a little bit more stable, a little bit more assured of myself, and my dad also knew at that point. My dad is very supportive. Kind of told him when I was about 12 or 11. And yeah, like the first day of school, my friend hung himself, and I remember that day. That was the first day I remember being like, whoa, like I'm never ever gonna hide my sexuality again. Like it was just one of those things that still like it's just like one of those things you never forget. Like I remember where I was in school. I remember, you know, all the other queer guys in school, like all the other gay guys in school being like just like really shook. Because I think up until that point, homophobia was something that was like, oh, like, yeah, calling someone bullaman, calling someone faggot, like, whatever, like, you know, it's not that hurtful. But then, having someone's life, you know, be taken over, like, have someone take their lives because of some of the comments and because of homophobia, really, I think to people who were being really actively homophobic, it made them realize that their actions had a lot of very real consequences. And for myself, it made me realize that it made me realize that I had the opportunity and the privilege to not have to be as much in the closet as other people. I had already at that point built up a very strong support group, like using Facebook, kind of like finding out through the grapevine who might be gay, and then we had like an online Facebook group where we would just like talk about gay shit all the time, and like kind of share our experiences in school, share our experiences of like where we were in our journey. I remember like on the group that day, just being, everyone was just like really depressed and like didn't know what to say. And I remember going to my dad's office really nearby, and like I told my dad what happened, and he was like, I think that was the first time that my dad tells me now that was the first time that he was actually scared to lose me. And that was the first time he realized that like suicide and mental health was like such a big part of LGBTQ people's experience. So I think it was just like a very, it's one of those things in life that you just don't forget. It was a big deal for me, it was a big deal for my dad. That was the first really transitional moment I feel like in my life. And then the second one was coming to Toronto and trying to figure out how my blackness, how my queerness, what my queerness looked like, how my queerness and my Caribbeanness interacted, and what were the spaces for that in Toronto. And basically finding the village very overwhelming, because I find a lot of places sometimes I had to be very Caribbean and kind of prove my Caribbeanness, or prove my Trininess. And then in other spaces, I find myself trying to not stand out too much because I wanted to be able to just explore my queerness without having anything to do with my Caribbeanness or my ethnicity, stuff like that. So my response to that was creating this event called Fry Plantains, which is like a queer soca fete. So for me, I was like, there's no fetes, like I was like, I miss fetes, like I miss Carnival. It's like the most depressing time of the year for me. Not even Christmas, I'm just like, Christmas is like the same everywhere for me, really. Carnival is like such a big part of my growing up. My dad works in culture, and he's very active in the Carnival community. So I was like, there's no queer fetes, like there's no gay fetes, like how is this not a thing that has happened yet? Or maybe I just don't know about them yet, but anyway, there's one now. And it's called Fry Plantains, and I was really nervous about throwing it. I was like, maybe there are not enough Caribbean queer people, like who's gonna come out, who knows? And the whole theme of it is like soca, mostly soca, some dancehall, and free fried plantains. And it was so packed. Oh my gosh! Like we didn't have it. It was like we're at capacity at like 11:30. I didn't have enough fried plantains, but it was so crazy to see so many people come out. And it's interesting. I mean, most of our events are attended by femmes, trans and femme people of color, and this specifically, like there were so many femme. Queer Caribbean people who are like, there is no space for us. Like, we love Rude, and we love Rude even more now because it feels so good to have our Caribbeanness be validated and have something that is very specifically for us. So yeah, that was kind of like my response to missing home, wanting to kind of fit in, but still hold on to a part of my culture that was so unique to me. Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Alissa. I guess would be the struggles between racial identity and same-sex attractions in terms of when I started university, that's when I really started to come to terms with trying to affirm any kind of same-sex desires and identity. And I think what university allowed me to do was to write, and to write about myself. So I think, if any advice I can give anybody in terms of how you come to terms with this was my biometography I published when I wrote my book about what it meant to journey through life. And in the absence of cultural supports for what it meant to, I don't want to use the word come out because it's so Western, but you know what I mean. Transitioning. in the absence of that, I felt writing allowed me an opportunity to come to terms with a journey. And that journey allowed me to raise fundamental questions about things I didn't know. For example, what's the relationship between slavery and homoeroticism? What's the relationship between slavery and indentureship? And what's the relationship between Black Indo-Caribbean and Afro-Caribbean and the tensions that exist? As I was writing my work, I think these are the kind of issues that haunted me. How do I talk about the tensions in what it means to be interracial, having Black family, Indian family, and the dynamics of what it meant to negotiate those things? One of the things that I see here today that is very interesting, which I didn't speak much about in my work, was the Indo-Caribbean men have always engaged in gender bending in ways that Black men have not been allowed to engage in gender bending. And I think there's a way in which Indo-Caribbean men have been able to celebrate same-sex desires or homoeroticisms in ways that were never challenged because of the tropes of masculinity were not the same in terms of an expectation of Indo-Caribbean men to be men, right? While I think an Indo-Caribbean man's expectation was a big house, and a Black man's expectation was masculinity performance, the tropes. And so there are ways in which I think battling those two things in my own work and in my everyday to be trying to make intelligible those relationships. And how those relationships today haven't really changed much or shifted in terms of, when we look around the room, in terms of who we see today in celebration. I was saying to a friend earlier, I wish this is what it was like 20 years ago or 20 years ago, when walking on Church Street was a crime. Going to Wesley subway was a sin. And coming out of Wesley subway and running straight to Church Street to the 590 was a sin. So I think that was another issue, what it meant to be in spaces that you considered gay and didn't want to be seen by folks who would see you on Church Street. You didn't want anybody to say to you, I saw you on Church Street. You didn't want anybody to say to you, I saw you on Wesley subway or college subway. Because it was so close to the proximity of queerness. So the whole idea of hiding, I think, was a struggle in terms of what it meant to do Black nationalistic work at the same time, because I was very much involved in Black nationalist work in the 70s and 80s, in the 80s and 90s mainly. And the struggles between bio-nationalism, Black nationalism, and same-sex desire. And the struggle to understand what it meant to do this work, be accepted. So there was a constant struggle, I think, and still is. The struggles haven't changed much in terms of what it means to be accepted. And I think acceptance still is, for me, a challenging work.
So much on the table here. I mean, clearly this is not a linear journey. And at the same time, Wesley reminds us of histories where the kind of danger was felt in very visceral ways that perhaps don't have the same sort of edge as they do now. I think what you all have also put on the table is that something that came up this morning, really importantly, was the question of intersectionality. Thinking about what Detoxx mentioned, which is, transphobia even within the queer community. The points Mark-Ché raised, I mean, you all make it Fatima and Conva accent, I mean, the whole class thing in Trinidad, right? So thinking about who gets heard and who doesn't, thinking about the points that Lauren raised about queer seniors in the Caribbean, those generational things, thinking about where is the space for thinking about rural, queer folks living in rural spaces in the Caribbean who we never hear about. And then just from where I'm from, Lauren does a wonderful acknowledgement of the Indigenous Guardians here in their bio. Where I'm from in Guyana, which has a negative population growth rate, the only group that has been growing is Indigenous populations, 10%. And even as we celebrate the fact that we're able to bring together Afro and Indo groups here, which is so important because I think that's such a big gap, because often we think in Canada the Caribbean is Black, and actually until 1996, if you were Indian and from the Caribbean, you could not mark yourself on the Canadian census. So we tend to think it's Black, and then when something goes wrong, it's Jamaican, right? So if you're Black, you're either Jamaican or Somali. But even here, to think about indigeneity within the space of the Caribbean, that is a huge gap in terms of our conversations about sexuality. So I think those silences are important. You've raised so many things. Let me come back to one thing that Mark-Ché raised and ask Detoxx, and then see if anyone wants to say anything. Maybe ask a few more. Not everyone has to answer, because we would like to. I don't really want you all hear me talk all the time. We want to go to the audience and see what people have. So much of the conversation, understandably, is about violence and about thinking about the Caribbean as a space of death and a space of disease and a space of dread, precisely. And I think the violence and the structural violence is absolutely important. But I am reminded by a student I'm working with who can't be here today, Nikolai Atai, that these are also spaces of joy and celebration. And when you look at when you look at these amazing performers here today, when you hear Mark-Ché talk about the FET space, like those spaces of queer joy, and spaces that lend themselves to queer joy. So, in the Hindu community, the Matikar, like when the women get together and put on a big, belanje and initiate another women into what to do on the marriage night, and it's an all-woman space. Like, these other spaces that have always existed in the Caribbean and the diaspora. I wondered if I could ask Detoxx to talk to us about drag performances and the clubs, not just as social things, but these are spaces that allow you not just to live, but to thrive, right?
Yes, and when you brought up, being able to be Jamaican and not being able to experience some of the great beauty of Jamaica, it's one of the biggest struggles for me as well, because recently we had Labor Day in New York City, and that's basically the big Caribbean Pride parade, big Caribbean parade. And for me, I felt really bad because I did not feel comfortable to go to an event like that, knowing that these people, many of them didn't accept me or didn't want to kill me or cause me harm. And for me, that was very, very sad, knowing that I'm Jamaican, but I can't go and experience these things because these people hate me. And I made a public post about it, and I found like a lot of people shared similar feelings towards it. Because that's something I often face as a Jamaican drag queen who still loves Jamaica, but have to keep it at a distance. And as far as performing the clubs, it's often, I find that being a Jamaican drag queen is sometimes like a fetish to some people, because it's like, oh, a Jamaican drag queen, you know what that means? And I'm like, absolutely not, because I'm a Christian man. But I do find it a struggle when it comes to my white counterparts, where they may get certain attention that I may not, because I'm a person of color or I'm a person from the island, so I am sought out to be less than until I show them my talent. And they're like, oh, you have talent. And I'm like, duh. Yeah, and so something like that has been also like a struggle, but it's one of those things where it's like, the way how America has set up, it's you can't do anything about it other than proving yourself, but it's sad that you kind of have to do that. Yeah.
Can I respond?
About the Caribbean, right? And safe spaces? Well, stigma and oppression creates hostile environments, right? But that does not mean that in the Caribbean we don't have these environments that are celebratory. I think I go home every year and I go to queer parties, but I'm not sure class is really the driving factor anymore in terms of how people celebrate same-sex environments back home. I think you see pockets of communities engaging in celebrations that have transformed in a period of time. And I think to some degree there is a Western homo hegemony that is influencing the Caribbean notion of celebration, that is tourist-driven to some degree. And we who go back every year contribute to that white homo hegemony tourism that breaks down these barriers around making governments feel guilty for not accepting queer folks. So I think one of my dangers with freedom in the Caribbean is how Canada and the US and UK and these places are really framing queerness from a white perspective. And I find that dangerous, because we are losing what I would like to see as an authentic Caribbean vernacular for talking about queerness. And I use the word queerness too, like that, But in my book, I tried my best to use Bullerman and Batty Boys and to really embody that as having an ingredient that is specific to a particular cultural experience and nuance that just can't be captured only in a text, but through lived experience. So I don't want us to see the Caribbean as a site of violence. It's not. And I don't ever want us to continue to talk about the Caribbean as a place we need to run from. I was very depressed when I heard people making refugee claims to come to Canada. I mean, rightly so, but I think it sends the wrong message. And I mean, I know some people get angry with me for that, but I think there are ways in which queer folks who have made refugee claims have contributed to the poster child image of the Caribbean as being about.
I want to respond to something. So two things. I think there's a nuance to talking about violence in the Caribbean, because I think that while there is a lot of violence for some people, I find when I mention classism being, I find a major factor in your experience of queerness, at least growing up as a in Trinidad and Tobago, I found that was a big factor in who was able to talk to their parents about it, who had access to the resources at school, who was able to go to the gay clubs. Like for me, I think that class, money especially, was a big driving factor in like how you were able to access a lot of these gay clubs. Like for me, like I went to gay clubs when I was like 16, 15, like in Trinidad and Tobago, and I feel like people always think about, I do agree that the Caribbean isn't just violent. I think there are tons of spaces in Caribbean to like go out. There are tons of gay clubs, there are tons of gay parties. There's so many gay parties during Carnival, too many. And I think that we need to have nuance when talking about joy versus the violence and discrimination that happened in the Caribbean. But I also find that even in Toronto, when I'm going out, like the DIY, for me, I like to go out to the DIY spaces, underground parties, and a lot of those spaces have been created and formed, like really shaped by Caribbean, African American, Latinx folk who I don't think everybody was running to Toronto, but I do feel that a lot of people who were experiencing so much violence in Trinidad and Tobago, who were like, I don't want to deal with this, I want to be able to express my queerness, and there's so many things working against me, they decided to move to Canada, or, use the refugee process to come to Canada, and those are the people who ended up creating a lot of really cool queer spaces that now exist in New York, and in Toronto, and in Montreal, and even myself, I feel like for me, a big part of like, I love Trinidad, I visit Trinidad, I go back to Trinidad all the time, but something that keeps me away a lot of the time is the way that my family treats me, and the interaction I have with like my mom and a lot of the like women in my family. And for so long, I feel like the depression that comes from the experience of not having your mom, not having your grandmother, not having an entire half of your family speak to you anymore is not something that, like, it affects your mental health in a way that you can't even, I feel like I still don't even have the words to really talk about what that does to me. But I feel for me, being in Toronto and having access to the spaces and the resources to create this like safe haven for Caribbean queer people, and just to like also explore my identities beyond my Caribbeanness, through art, through performance artwork, through meeting other drag queens, through curating art shows in the city, and being able to be unapologetically Caribbean, and sort of redefine what that means to me. I think that's really important, and I think that people have been doing it in Trinidad and Tobago. They're continuing to do it. Even with, I think, as much as there's violence and you hear about the violence, there's just as many events, parties, there's just as many art shows happening. I feel like I went out as much as I did in Toronto, in Trinidad and Tobago. I feel like there's nuance to those conversations about leaving the Caribbean and coming to North America and living and existing as a queer person in Trinidad and existing as a queer person in Toronto. So, yeah, we're making sense.
Myself personally, I can't speak from a perspective of growing up in the Caribbean. I know that whenever I have gone back to visit Antigua, you know, at least the last 3 times that I'm trying to go as an adult, I was trying to seek out those clubs, but they're so underground, it's so impossible to find them if you need to know somebody. And I don't know any Caribbean queer people, well, Antiguan queer people, because the ones who are in Antigua, who are Antiguan are here now. So it's really hard. And then like when you like find things on Google, it's like all white people. I'm just like, really? Like, that's what the Caribbean, like, that's what the Antiguan, you know, LGBTQ community is like. So I just ran far away from that. But I found my validity in Toronto. Luckily, I guess came out or was pulled out early enough to be able to be framed by the culture and the community here. Straight out of high school, I've been part of the ballroom scene. I'm sure you know about the ballroom, yeah? It started in New York City many decades ago, but I have been part of the House of Monroe for 10 years now. So since I was, thank you. So since I was 18, I joined the House of Monroe, and that was just very validating because being able to perform in balls, being like you literally get trophies and you get cash prizes on being authentically yourself. In a nutshell. So it's been very beautiful being part of that community, also being part of Soy community, supporting our youth. I've been part of Black queer youth since I was 16, so I've been like literally here for like 12 years doing stuff. And then the different parties that come from that, people like Connections, Blockorama, Blockobana, and all the different like very Black Caribbean, you know, Palau from Jamaica, like all the different Black and Caribbean focused parties that have been, I guess, it has legitimized me because it was very different from what I heard in high school and being conflicted being a Black person and being a queer person. So it was just very legitimizing to me to be able to be raised in a Black queer scene, and I'm still here and I'm still loving it, so.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to, Wesley say open up the floor. I actually have one more little question for you all, but I think what was said here was so important because we haven't really had space before to talk precisely about these spaces of affirmation and these spaces of joy and laughter. And when you guys are talking about it, you could sense the energy and the excitement. And one of the things I want to just throw out to the entire audience as a thought is that, you know, it's this cultural production, whether we're thinking of Calypso Rose, who is a queer senior, or whether we're thinking of Drupati, whether we're thinking of Dion Brand or Shani Matu, it is our cultural producers and cultural production and all of these spaces that have really given us life. And I want to just say that because this morning, so much of the discussion is about funding, movements, funding. And we got to be really careful, I think, when we play that game because we get caught in the trap of thinking that the state is the answer. Yes. And we get caught in the trap of the state then picking and choosing who our activists and who our heroes are. And then they pick individuals who become associated with the movement. That is not a movement because you can take one away and it'll disappear. So I think there's much to learn. It wasn't an innocent question I was asking about joy. It was that we really need to rethink our politics and how we source ourselves and where this funding is coming from and how that funding puts constraints on us and how it throws up people who are then presented to us as the ones who must lead us to salvation. It could have been independent salvation, feminist salvation, and today it's queer salvation. And we need to be really wary of this. So the last little thing I'll ask, and y'all, I talk long and you talk long too, so very short answers now. You can tell I like to tease. But the last little thing I want to ask before I open it to the audience is, can you, any of you, not everyone has hands, give an example of work that connects you between where you are here and where you are, and the Caribbean, the folks who never left or couldn't leave, and those of us who've left. You can't knock people who've left and got in here, however they had to get in here. You had to demonstrate yourself and prostrate yourself before a racist Canadian state. That was just what happened, right? But can you give an example of any work you do that connects you to the Caribbean, and how do you try to shrink that distance in your relations? And after that, we open it up to the floor.
So this ties back to what I was saying earlier when I spoke about not being able to feel accepted at the Labor Day parade. And most of you guys mostly know Mohammed, right? Yeah. And I'm pretty sure you guys have seen the videos he shared in regards to Pride. So on June 26 or 24, whatever day it was, I was in a beautiful decorated Jamaican-inspired costume with the Jamaican colors. And I felt so liberated walking down Fifth Avenue in my Jamaican pride colors. And to me, that kind of gave me my connection back to Jamaica. And what even took it to another level was when I went home, I saw the videos of people sending me like, hey, you were on the national TV on the news, and they read out the mission statement of the Caribbean Equality Project, and they made mention the Caribbean, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm here being represented on national TV as a Jamaican queer person, and I was physically shown. And that was so amazing. And a lot of Caribbean people connect with Muhammad or the Caribbean Equality Project, and they see the work that we do. And I've had so many people reach out to me like, hey, it's so amazing that you're Jamaican and you're living your truth and you're just like being so vibrant. And for me, that's a way of, I'm not physically there to connect with people, but because of the work I'm doing here, it's been connected to other people who've seen that, and they're getting some type of liberation, like, hey, there's still hope, and I'm not gonna give up.
Ryan asked me to teach a course called Queer in the Caribbean. And what I do with this course is I Skype almost every week people in from the Caribbean to speak to my students. So I think that's one way in which I think I keep the discussion connected. I also go back to UB every year as much as I can to do work on gender and masculinity and queer stuff. So I think that's the connection that I keep. And as much as I can do is I do that. This is my last year of teaching it, so after that somebody else can take it over. No, but this is I'm doing it for 1 year, I'm more than that.
Personally, I think my most tangible connection came in 2016 when I became youth ambassador for Pride Toronto. I was honored as the youth ambassador. It was one of the honored positions, and ours truly, Tashika Levan, did a piece on me because she's Antiguan as well. So she wrote an article on me for the Antigua Observer. Unfortunately, I think the Antiguan Observer did not want to publish it because of the content of being queer. So it was broadcast around like general Caribbean newspapers. Actually, I went back home to Antigua about a month later, and people recognized me because my family is pretty well known. Like my grandfather, who's now passed, he is a diplomat in Antigua. So like news spread kind of like that I was just like the queer grandchild, living abroad and then coming back home and stuff like that. So when I came back to Antigua, people were, asking me, oh, Tashika, I'm just like, yeah, she's my friend, she's cool. And they're just like, oh, I read your article. And they didn't really have negative things to say, thankfully. They're just like, I know about you, and I don't really know what they were thinking, but I was really hoping that a queer person would approach me so that, I could share resources and kind of have community come to me, because I had absolutely no idea where to look for it. So yeah, thank you Tashika for writing that piece and and giving me that visibility in Antigua. Also, a lot of the feedback, because Tashika also did put it on her Facebook, and there were a lot of Antiguans being like, she's not Antiguan, she's Canadian and all that stuff, and people were trying to not claim me as an Antiguan person, and I guess it kind of struck me, and I was conflicted about going back, because it's always like being a displaced person, you never really feel like you belong anywhere. Like you don't really feel like you belong in Canada. You don't really feel like, if you're born in Canada, you don't really feel like you are Caribbean, and then because you're Caribbean, you don't really feel African. So it's always just permanent displacement and like not being claimed at all. So at the same time, it's also good being visible because like it wasn't me who went out and was just like, oh, I'm queer and I'm here and I'm proud and you know I'm ready to find people like in Antigua. Like that seed was planted about me first, and then people chose to came to me, and you know it spread around families. So I don't know, I don't really care about the shame or whatever. It really was a piece about an Antiguan person who was proud in her sexuality and who was being rewarded for the work that she's done. And I think some people were proud of that. So I'm happy about that, and I'm still hoping that when I go back in a few months or maybe next year, that I can still find some people to approach me.
For me, I think that my entry point, my continued entry point has really been personal relationships that I formed with people that were a part of my fieldwork research. I definitely stay in touch with them and I try to support the work that they're doing on the ground. It's been a few years since I've been back to Trinidad, since I did my research, so I always try to be really aware of the fact that I am not on the ground in the region, so I don't know exactly everything that's happening. There's been such a big growth in organizing around sexuality and rights and community and things like that, so I don't try to claim that I know what would be best for the region, but I try to support people from this side of the diaspora, and that's sort of been my biggest entry point. And aside from that, another thing that I've been thinking about, and my mind is just swimming with all of the questions and the things you've raised, Alissa, and so I'm thinking about class and I'm thinking about academia as well. A lot of people have been talking about academia here today, and you know, I didn't ever finish writing my dissertation that these fieldwork interviews were a part of, and that's something that I still carry with me, and I'm still trying to figure out how best to share those stories with people, right, in a way that feels good for those people and a way that feels good for me, because I also feel that being in academia to do this kind of personal work was not good for my mental health, and like seriously not good for my mental health, where like I couldn't actually get over that no matter how many times I tried or different ways I tried to do it. So I'm really trying to figure out how to honor those people's stories and to share those things in a way that makes sense for community here and in Trinidad. And I feel that still does connect me in a way to queer Trinidadian history, right? I think that it's a responsibility that I have to figure out the storytelling aspect of it, and you know, be able to go back and present this and ask people for what they feel about it, ask people, you know, to contribute and help with that. But I do think that that's been a bit of a shift for me in terms of my role. I do see myself more as like a storyteller in training, and that I'm still trying to figure out how to do that responsibly as well.
Yes, I think I can think of a couple ways. One is I only play in gay Juve bands when I go back to Trinidad. There are now 2 gay Juve bands. One is run by, sorry? You can always like queerish, I find, but like there's Cocoa Devils. Best of my life. There's a new one now too, but I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I only play with like gay Juve bands, and I mean like all the carnival bands are gay, so that's not really a big deal. There's that. I think through really exploring my own, exploring my identities in Toronto and being visible and like posting about it a lot and sharing a lot of my stories online with friends, like with my friends in Trinidad and my friends who are from Trinidad but are in other places, and having those conversations with my friends back home and a lot of people back home. I think it's been I find like that's my way of just kind of like, it's not really giving back, because I find it like, I hate talking about my friends back home as like, it's like a pity thing. A lot of them love Trinidad and do not want to move. So I think for me, it's just like kind of like being unapologetically me. I think exploring like being polyamorous and exploring being married and like exploring what that's like, and being really open and like sharing my progress with race and my experiences with gender and my experiences with polyamory and my experiences with the ballroom scene. Like I'm like, you know, starting, like I'm a Syriano, and you know, curating work by other queer Caribbean artists has been so much fun, because I think I did a show last year called Black Nuance Shade. It was the only Black queer art show for Pragg, and something that I find that comes up a lot is that like there'll be one Black artist in a queer show, and they'll have to kind of like, in addition to doing whatever their work is about, also kind of have to like stand for Blackness. And it's like sometimes I feel that with Caribbean, with being Caribbean, sometimes I'm always like I have to like be all the things I want to be, and also be very like Caribbean. And I'm like, I am Caribbean, and I feel like allowing myself the opportunity to you know, explore my sexuality and the nuances of my own identities is my way of expressing my Caribbeanness. And I think, and the last way I think how I like keep in touch with my friends back home is helping them, the ones who do want to immigrate, helping them with that process, because a lot of them like hate it. Their parents are not supportive, they are in violent situations, or they're just like, I want something else, I want to be in a different space. And I think helping them with that process and supporting them through that process, because it is a really shitty process, the immigration process, and it's really terrible on your mental health. So I think like helping friends who want that support and who, you know, want to talk to someone about what that's like. And also connecting. My dad is like really supportive. Like, oh my god, my dad, I have to stand my dad. Like, he's actually like the best. In our wedding, we made our dads walk us down the aisle to kind of like, yeah, it was like a whole masculinity thing. Because a lot of people always talk about like I feel like there's so much so many negative expectations placed on men in Caribbean families when it comes to accepting their son or dealing with their children's sexual orientation. But my dad's been really supportive, and he's like, at my wedding, he talks about like all of these new resources that he's like reading, and he talks to my friends, my friends who live there when their parents are not being cool. Like he's always just like, call me, like I'll talk to you, I can talk to your parents for you, which has been like really cool to see, because it was definitely not me pressuring him to do that. So yeah, that's another way. Like a lot of my friends would be like, yeah, like I called your dad and my mom was being really homophobic, and like he really like calmed me down. And I was like, bitch, like my dad didn't even tell me that when I talked, like, you know. So yeah, that's like kind of like some of the ways.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Trotz, for just bringing up the fact that Caribbean identity is more than just in this Afro-Indo-binary. You actually brought up the indigenous population, and we didn't really discuss indigeneity within a Caribbean context yet. We haven't really discussed the Sino-Caribbean population, the unique experiences that they experience. We really didn't talk about, you know, biracial identities, multiracial identities, but so I just want to thank you for opening up that discussion. Unfortunately, we're not going to do it justice, you know, in the next 30 minutes, but that was a very important one. My question is actually for Mark-Ché about Mark-Ché, sorry, I apologize, about your opinion on the ways in which carnival culture has opened up queer spaces throughout history, and you know, Dr. Crichlow, feel free to jump in on that, or anyone who has experiences in Trinidad carnival scene to answer that. And also the ways in which that is importing Western frameworks for what it means to be queer, as a lot of people who visit the carnival scene do live abroad, and what ways it's actually authentically Trinidadian.
Let's take the other two questions and then we'll go to the...
Yeah, shout them out loud.
Oh, I'm not loud. Yes, you are. I'm not loud. I'm not loud. That's okay.
I got you.
Thank you. Let you guys know.
Gotta protect them, you know?
I'm Ashley. Hi. I like long walks on the beach.
Stop.
I took a little issue with what you said, Mr. Crichlow, about refugees leaving the Caribbean. I don't think it was very fair to blame victims of homophobic violence for having to leave the country. Like refugees, they're not leaving by choice, they're leaving because the situation is so bad that they couldn't have stayed. I'm speaking from a place of privilege. I'm Jamaican, I was raised in Jamaica, but I was born here. So when it came time for me to leave, it was a much easier process. But I can't imagine growing up there. I left at 13 when I just realized my sexuality. I can't imagine having to stay at Montego Bay High for girls and coming to grips with my sexuality and coming to grips with also my mental health when there was no support and no guidance for that kind of thing. I remember one of my best friends was caught doing gay shit and got in a lot of trouble for it. And she didn't have the option to just up and leave. So I don't know, I just found your words as a little bit troubling when the infrastructure isn't there yet to support people who are coming to terms with their identity and their mental health. So it's not really a question, but I was just wondering if that's something that you could give a little more thought. Because I don't know, I just thought it was a little bit problematic.
Well, you just opened up and more hands went up. So, oh my God. So Mohammed was saying one question at a time. We just took two. I'm going to ask folks to answer really briefly because we now have 3 hands. At the back, 2, and then Jason.
Can we answer the question as they go along, if that's okay? Because I may just get answers as we go along.
Yes.
She brought up Ashley, you brought up something very important, and I want to mention it earlier. A lot of people who do leave Jamaica for me, in my perspective, I was fortunate to leave Jamaica because my mom was able to come here and she was able to file for me to come here. And I have to say, going back to Jamaica, I've only gone twice or 3 times since I've left. I've left over about 11, 12 plus years now. And for me, I don't have much desire to go back, only because I find it unsafe there, and I've met people on Facebook or social media from Jamaica, and they tell me these like horrible stories, and I've seen videos across YouTube where it makes me not want to go to Jamaica. It makes me want to just like turn away from it. So I completely understand what you were saying, and I love that you brought that up. I just want to respond to that. Yeah.
Thank you for raising the point. I said I was saddened to see that people in the Caribbean had to claim refugee status on the grounds of sexual orientation, because I don't think it represents the Caribbean in the way I know the Caribbean when I lived there. And I'm referring specifically to Trinidad. In the context of Trinidad, I think there are ways in which people celebrate their bodies and engage in forms of resistance around the state violence that, for me, I was asked at least 8 times to write letters, expert letters for different people claiming refugee status. And I was getting these calls of lawyers explaining stuff to me that didn't exist in the Caribbean. And so what I was getting at is really a broader context in which some lawyers will call you to ask you to write these expert witness letters to support their client claim, and fabricating stuff sometimes in ways that didn't exist. And I'm speaking specifically about the context of only Trinidad, not Jamaica. And so that started to raise some concerns for me and questions about how we are projecting the Caribbean in this particular uncivilized way. And I was concerned about that in that context. I'm not speaking about Jamaica, I'm speaking specifically about the experience that I had where lawyers have called me and asked me to write letters and to support letters that I felt was beyond my ethics.
I want to jump on this as well before I answer your question. I think everyone's experience with their sexual orientation or their gender identity and gender expression is very different, and I think that if we look at it from an intersectional perspective, I think that having the privilege to leave and needing to leave versus wanting to leave are all things that we need to consider when we're thinking about like who becomes a refugee and who decides to use the refugee process. I'm also not of the belief. I think if you need to lie to leave because you feel unsafe, lie. I also think that like sometimes I think we talk about mental health so much in Toronto and in North America, and like, you know, the effects of like what homophobia and transphobia does to your mental health. And I feel like a lot of the times people who don't have access to that language and to those resources, they're going through homophobia and transphobia at home, and they may not be violent, but then the way it affects their mental health makes it really, really difficult to function. I feel like for me as well, I think the homophobia wasn't really violent for me a lot of the times, but like not having your parents speak to you, not having like your family be there, like being depressed. Like I feel like now that I look back and I think that I have the language and I have the language to speak about my mental health in a more nuanced way, I can now label the ways that I used to feel, and I think that continuing to live in a space like that can only harm you more. So I do think that, in my experience, I think if it is that there is a way for you to like leave if you feel like you need to leave, I think that should absolutely be an option that everybody should have. Everybody should like, that should be an option for anyone and everyone, and it isn't, because it is very much like, it's definitely based on your economic, your income, not your income, sorry. It's definitely based on the access is definitely limited, but I think if you need to use it, and I do think, for me, when I heard the commentary, I was kind of like, I don't know, like I feel like there's more nuance to the refugee, I don't call it a situation, but the ways in which the refugee program is used and utilized by people who need it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Do you want to anyone?
I'm just going to add like one thing to that. Regarding the Caribbean Equality Project's work, we do a lot of immigration work in New York City. A lot of our clients are asylum seekers, and I use my privilege to be unethical. And that means writing these letters, knowing that the safety of our community is more important than an immigration law. When it comes to identity, we have to acknowledge that our own community don't know our identities. And as we're learning who we are, we've realized that our Caribbean, our country, has been unethical to us, to the point where we are called criminals. And last comment regarding asylum. I'm an immigrant. I had the privilege to come to this country with my mom and my family. And most of our clients and most of my friends have left their family in order to survive in another land that's not theirs. So they have abandoned not only their family, not only were they abandoned by their family, they've abandoned their country and their culture to survive in another culture.
We can't actually have a panel ending without a little bacchanal. This is so let me just take a pin, because I mean,
okay, I won't talk for too long, but a couple things. First of all, borders are violent. That's the real violence. Nation states are fake. Why should we be gatekeepers for other people, right? If somebody needs you to sign a letter, like I mean, I'm not expert, I'm not a doctor, I'm not anybody, but I'll sign your letter. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't care if you're gay. I don't care why you want to leave. I don't think we should control other people's movements around. Right? I just don't think it has anything to do one with the other. And I think that also times change, situations change. I think the visibility of the LGBT community has changed things in Trinidad, which is also where I study and where I have looked at things. And the visibility of communities can really shift the backlash that people face. And in the interviews that I did for my fieldwork, a lot of people said that they feared decriminalization because they thought there was going to be more violence, there would be more murders. So it's not always as simple as that, and a linear model of modernity, which is sort of, I think, where we're heading, right, or how we're talking about this. It's not always, we don't need to follow these Western paths, and I do think that it's extremely troubling. Like, just let people move where they want to, and if we need to exploit the Canadian government to do that, then that's fine.
Yes, we're going to go to the other questions, but let me just say, I think we clearly have some disagreements, but I also think we have to sometimes listen to what everyone is saying. So I think what y'all are saying, the real violence you're experiencing, whether it's Trinidad or Guyana or wherever, I mean, my parents live in the Caribbean, and they are amazing in the way that Che's parents are. They don't live here, but they love me for whoever I am. We need to also hear what, even if we don't agree with everything Wesley say, or Wesley very disgusting, so how he just say things don't always like it. But we also need to hear the fact that Wesley is refusing to let whiteness and white supremacy off the hook. Because what he's saying is that when we write these letters, absolutely, but understand that we're playing into white supremacist logics about where we're coming from, and they play right back into stereotypes that as queer people we also have to battle. And it brings us back to the intersectionality, that we do what we need to do to come here, but then recognizing that there are parts of ourselves that we also have to amputate in order to be here, to satisfy a white supremacist logic that we deserve to get in. And I can speak from experience with gender violence, domestic violence cases with the women's group I work in Guyana with, where you have to carry on as if everyone is going to be killed. And we do it, I do it because the women need to come here. But I also understand that there are consequences to playing that, to having to work within that logic, so that our activism has to take on both the homophobia in the Caribbean and the homophobia and the white supremacy of here, right? I just wanted to... Wait, hold on, we had a question. What's that? All right. Okay. And then we really have like 1, 2, and 3.
So real quickly, everyone, good afternoon. For those who haven't hugged or greeted or welcome to Breaking Silences, hello, I am Theo Brown, the Public Relations Officer for the Caribbean Equality Project. So we're going to be wrapping in a few, but in order to do so, we're going to facilitate about 2 to 3 more questions, and I do see some hands here, there, and everywhere. So we're going to narrow it down to 3, and we will get started so we can get to wrapping. So I know Leslie it is, right? I met you earlier, so you're off the hook. So you get the mic first, and then we'll progress to the other 2 questions.
I was going to answer the question about the carnival question I was asked.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Yes.
So, 2 things. Carnival has always been a very queer time for me in Trinidad and Tobago. I think it's the one time I feel the least not just fear, but the least restricted. I feel like I can play with my gender more. I can play with I can wind up on whoever I want to. It feels more, for me at least, it has always felt very free. I also feel like now that I think back to my dad's very involved with traditional mask characters. So many of those traditional mask characters are so gender queer because of how you play them. Men play Dan Lorraine, so many different traditional characters. They were not necessarily, even though they were male or female characters, there was never a hard line on who gets to play them or who gets to dress up. That's my first thing, and I think that for me, I think because Carnival has always been such a place of queerness to me, it was the reason why I wanted to have that queer silk effect be a big part of the collective. I think that Carnival for me feels like a sect, Pride. Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago feels like Pride for me, because it's I find it's 2 months of fetes and partying. I feel because we're in this space of joy and this place of acceptance. This is very specifically my experience and my queer friends' experience. I very rarely deal with homophobia at fetes. People are just not in that headspace. For Carnival, people are just not in that headspace. Again, my experience. But I find things to be very... a little bit more open, and I find it, and I think Carnival, of course, like there's these people coming, tourism, a lot of tourism happens, a lot of tourists come in, for Carnival, and of course I think we're obviously gay tourists romanticize us during Carnival as well, but I also think that is a time that a lot of queer people get to come out, party, meet other queer Trinidadian people, and I think that's something that we need to hold on to, and I think for me, what I need to focus on is how Caribana is framed as very homophobic, when in a lot of places Carnival isn't. So that's something that I think about.
Very key point about Carnival and Bacchanal and Fetting, which gives me a perfect plug. Tonight is Queer Fete, guys. Please don't forget our Queer Fete. It happens after, our symposium closing. All right, Leslie.
Hi, thanks Theo. Thank you to the Caribbean Equity Project for hosting this amazing day. I was the first person here this year. So my name is Leslie and this is Lily. It's important for you to know that this is Lily. And we want you to join us on the dance floor tonight. The DJ Zara at the Fly. I have my ticket. So I was really happy to read the program when I saw Intergenerational. And then I became sad because I don't see me reflected on any of the panels. And I was in Trinidad in February and following up on Lauren's work, I formed a little group called Queer Trini Elders of 6 women who are age 50 plus. And they don't identify as 60, 50 plus. They don't use labels, they're just women loving women. And I have the honor and the privilege of going to Belize to that ICADE conference that Beverly was talking about. And I'm going to be presenting on queer seniors in the Caribbean. I was at the conference in St. Lucia last year and I asked about queer seniors in the Caribbean, especially queer lesbians. And one of the participants says, we don't have any. Well, many of us are there. You just have to find us and work with us. And it's really hard for me doing this work here in Toronto because I'm usually the only raisin in the rice pudding of doing this work. So it really would be nice if the Caribbean Equity Project could start looking at working with queer seniors who are Indo, Afro-Caribbean. Somebody talked about Sino. I am Indo, Carib, and Chinese. So one day, all of you will be queer seniors. And but seriously, we have to start talking about how we're going to take care of each other as we get older. Because I work with the Ministry of Health here in Ontario, and I am the only queer senior on 3 of their round tables where decisions are being made about healthcare for seniors. We are not represented at those tables. So we need to figure out ways of how we're going to take care of each other as we age, because the long-term care homes are not built for us, and retirement homes are not built for us. And hospitals really don't see us, and we become invisible as we get older. The isolation is worse, and we start going back into those closets. And we don't want to do that, because now we are coming out, we need to start working together and supporting each other. So thank you.
For those pearls of wisdom, we're going to hear a few words from Mr. Amin right here.
Thank you, Leslie. We have tried for over, I want to say 3 months, more like 6 months, to really create an experience that is intergenerational. And this is our community speak out. Like New York, we talk about community speak outs all the time. And it's raw, it's authentic, it's unpleasant, but most important, like we encourage folks to be unapologetic with their opinions. It helps us to grow, it helps us to make improvements, and it also helps us to build community, because oftentimes those who don't speak remain silent, right? And we aim to make sure we uplift those voices. We have a program called Unchained. It is the only Caribbean LGBTQ support group in New York City. And it is truly, authentically intergenerational. We have folks with disabilities, we have folks that are biracial, we have folks that are in their 50s and 60s that travels almost
2 hours.
2 hours, thank you Theo, just to be there. Because that is the only safe space that they can be themselves. And most of these folks are not out. And we have acknowledged that. Most of these folks in their 60s and 70s are trying to still accept who they are and still try to navigate a world where a 35-year-old queer Muslim immigrant from Guyana could stand in front of a room of his heroes and be himself. So this work in itself is difficult. But one of the things that keeps us going is community. And that's everyone that's a part of our community.
So we have one more right here.
I'll just say this really quick. To everything that was said, just think about being HIV positive. I'm disclosing I've been HIV positive since 1988. Supposed to be dead since 1993. Add that to what Leslie has said, and what you have said, and how do you incorporate something like myself, especially in family. Uncle's still alive. It would have been better if Uncle had died, and we could have swapped him underneath the carpet. But Uncle's still here, he's now 52. So put that into the mix of the HIV and the dialogue.
And you know, like, absolutely, that's such a great point too, because that's what this forum is about, right? It's about for us to connect. And now I'm hoping, we're going to be leaving Canada in 2 days, but what we have done here collectively today, this work continues through all of us. And I'm so glad you're here, because you need to continue speaking up about your identity, things that affects you, the issue that affects you, because if you don't, no one else will, right? And that's also part of why immigrant in this country needs to continue to talk about. We in New York are fighting. Our government is not accepting immigrants from our countries.
Yep.
And our women are not being able to file asylum anymore based on sexual violence. And that also includes the men who have experienced sexual violence. So immigration and asylum is a really personal issue that we deal with a lot. But also we have our Knowing Matters program, which is our sexual health and wellness program. And a lot of that includes testing. A lot of that includes about talking about condom, the use of condom,
PrEP.
and PrEP, and also like erase that narrative, like bad man don't use condom. Yes, we use condom because we respect who we are and we respect our partners. And for those who are affected by HIV, remove the stigma and educate to remove stigma. Thank you for sharing.
All right, so we're gonna go to our next question.
Unfortunately, I don't have a direct resource, because we do have different kinds of barriers that we deal with in the LGBTQ community. Through my own research, I know that even if a woman, for example, who's in a lesbian relationship goes to a shelter, her girlfriend can go to that shelter too and find her. And also, if a trans woman is experiencing violence, or I should have said the first people were cis people, but if a trans woman is experiencing violence, then there's barriers for her to get into shelters. There's a lot of other barriers to be able to get into the one LGBTQ shelter that is in Toronto, the only one in Canada as well. So we do we do have a lot of specific issues that are not really dealt with on a systemic level. A lot of times, if you call police, which who wants to do that anyway, but if you call police, then they kind of brush under the rug. They don't really take it seriously, because they're just oh, it's two girls, you can just fight it off. It's two guys, you can fight each other. So what I have seen in community is a lot of community accountability. So if there are perpetrators or abusers in the community, then people there are different circles where you can tell somebody a name and that person out of community can like get protection, they can garner resources from certain just like grassroots community people. It's not on a systemic level, but there have been like some community interventions because there has been a huge gap when it comes to accessing services, like escaping inter-partner violence from LGBTQ couples. But I do see that there has been a lot of grassroots like mobilizing amongst ourselves where you seek safety from your friends and your friends' friends, but unfortunately everybody does know each other. So, you know, the same friends that you have are probably the same friends that are friends with your partner sometimes. So a lot of times it just comes down to naming somebody and then people taking collective action to keep that person safe, like in similar spaces. But yeah, there is a huge gap, and I wish I could speak more to it, but I do know the specific you know, details, like the specific barriers from LGBTQ people.
Can I say something to respond to that really quick? What you brought up was very important. And what I say in regards to domestic violence relationship, after someone leaves that relationship, they often bring it to another relationship and they think that then becomes the norm. I know from my personal experience, I started dating someone, and when we started dating, he got rough with me. You know, like I thought it would be like, oh, we're just play fighting, but I saw anger in him. And what I did, because I was sometimes tough, so I was not about to get into a domestic, like you get into something where we get physical, because I know how I can be. And the first thing I did was like to check that in the butt, like right then and there, be like, hey, I know you may have had this and this in your past relationship, but in this relationship, we're not here to fight each other, we're here to love each other. And if we're going to be fighting, then probably we should separate. And I think for most people, if they've experienced it, I would say try to, if you do get into a relationship, you see it starting happening, don't try to like just brush it off, talk about it then and there, and be upfront with yourself. Like, yeah, you may want to be loved at that moment, but you don't want to be loved and then being. And I just want to, you know, just talk about it first, and then if it's not what you want, then you better run fast.
I just want to say really quickly, I mean, it's a really important point you make, and I think what it tells us as well is that our struggles can't be single issue. So if I speak for, say, just up here this morning, I was asking the Caribbean Equality Project, and I gave Mohammed an opportunity to speak about the work they do with the Jihadi sisters who have been advocating on behalf of Rajwanti, on behalf of Stacey Singh, on behalf of the dozens of women who have been murdered at the hands of their partners in the New York City area. And in the Caribbean, for example, I'm from Guyana, and for the last 25 years I work with a women's organization called Red Thread. Well, the SASOD, which is the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination, comes out to rallies with Red Thread, comes out with help and shelter, because we understand that in addition to misogyny, we also face the kinds of things that Jordyn was talking about in terms of the homophobia and transphobia, so that if there's violence in queer relationships, there's another level of invisibility. But we understand that we either, and in your example, where it's not even different people, it's one person experiencing violence in a heteronormative relationship and then shifting into sort of a queer life, right? That unless we work together, and I think that's where I want to end, unless we work together and we begin with those who have the least. We have to begin with the working class, queer, marginalized folks, because when they are lifted, everyone is lifted. But unless we are prepared to do that, we're always going to end up with the middle class, with the individual heroes, with the funded things. I come back to the point I made earlier, that that's where we have to start. And I think your question, you know, has really put the stakes. What are the stakes, and what are we really fighting for, and how do we keep that fight going? You know, Frederick Douglass says power concedes nothing without a struggle, but that struggle has to be consistent, and we can only keep doing it if there are enough of us multiplied, so that when Muhammad tired and he might say, boy, take a break, you know that somebody else and other people will step into the gap, right? That's how it has to work.
I didn't get to say this, but also in my experience growing up in the community, I'm only speaking from one perspective, and I'm not saying that this is exclusive to masculine people, but there also is a huge problem of toxic masculinity that has been reproduced in masculine of center, like butch, stud, women, and also trans men, who are also, not everybody, but it's just that when you learn from, like when you learn your masculinity from a toxic masculine culture, then you kind of overcompensate from that, especially for being a woman, and the traits that you do sometimes are inherently problematic and inherently violent to the partner that you're with. So I think having more conversations about toxic masculinity and how that is reproduced in different LGBTQ relationships, especially amongst like butch masculine center people and including trans men, then we have to start challenging that and unlearning that within ourselves. So.
Thank you. That was a really great question. When we first hosted Breaking Silences in 2016, we had an entire workshop on intimate partner violence. Because of the space, we weren't able to address it today. One of the organizations that we work with in New York City is called the New York City Anti-Violence Project. And they are an amazing resource, and resource for folks who are survivors of intimate partner violence, specifically within the LGBTQ community. And we work with them. They're one of our allies in New York City. We are going to share their information with all of you. We're going to be sending out a thank you email and a feedback form. And in that email, we will share their resource with you. And if anyone knows of an organization in Toronto or Canada, period, that does work around intimate partner violence, specifically intimate partner violence and not just domestic violence, please reach out to us and let us know. And just to uplift jihadi sisters, again, we do a lot of work with jihadi sisters regarding intimate partner violence. One of the challenges that we've encountered are getting folks to come forward. We deal with it more behind the scenes. A lot of the survivors are now willing to come forward, but we have dealt with issues from financial violence, economic violence, immigration violence. We have clients that are now using the fiancé visa, and you see my accent coming out, right? The fiancé visa as a way of coming to New York, and when they get to New York, their partners take their passports away from them. And that's also a form of intimate partner violence, right? And these are issues that we're currently dealing with in New York City. And as Caribbean people, being here alone is tremendous. It's tremendous power that we have being visible here today. And a lot of our work is not about, we create visibility, but we also address the issues of those that are invisible. We have an amazing cultural performance by Sundari, the Indian goddess. I just want to say thank you to the panelists for everything that you've contributed. I am personally happy about the community Speak Out. It is a speak out, honey. But this conference was built with love, grounded in community, to uplift our stories and our voices.